The Birth of the Constitution is the second episode of This Is America, Charlie Brown, and I have to say I enjoyed it, but I don't think it's as good as the first one. And the reason for that is I don't feel like the characters slotted into the narrative quite as well. In the previous episode, it felt like they were characters within that time period. This one kind of felt more like they were observers, so it wasn't quite as immersive. And I also feel like a lot of the language in this was a little bit more complex and not as easily explained. But I still thought it was interesting. However, there was actually apparently one goof according to IMDb, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the Birth of the Constitution, as you can imagine, is about the delegates who came together from the different states to try and, well, reach a conclusion about what the Constitution would be and what that approach looked like. And I knew nothing about the birth of the Constitution, so I definitely learned some stuff. And indeed, the length of time it certainly took quite a long time. And the various problems they had to consider, and I feel like a lot of the points in this are really relevant today in how we elect leaders. Some really interesting thoughts were raised, and I don't want to spoil them too much by giving away all those thoughts, but it was definitely very thought-provoking. Things like, the bigger states would have a bigger hand in who's elected, and things not being evenly balanced, which I thought was pretty important and pretty inspiring as well when it comes to making things right and fair in these discussions to make sure that everybody had fair representation. So definitely interesting, but as I said, I feel like some of the vocabulary is a little bit too complex for Charlie Brown. And there are things that the characters would ordinarily explain, but they didn't seem to do that here, so I feel like it just didn't work very well. And the characters, as I said, felt more like observers than part of the actual narrative, which is a shame because I feel like they would have had really interesting roles to play. They did have roles, they were given roles, but they weren't. Most of the time, we saw them just watching the discussion about the Constitution and passing commentary here and there, which yes helped to explain some things, but they were just observers, and it wasn't as immersive as the previous episode. Maybe every episode of This Is America is going to be like that. I don't know, but the point is, I found the other episode more interesting because we got to see the characters of Charlie Brown as characters within the story more so. And I think it worked more to help make things more immersive and feel like you're actually there. We also obviously have a lot of adult characters talking, which is something I don't like in Charlie Brown, because the magic of Charlie Brown is that we're in a children's world where they see things, well, we're in an adult world through the children's eyes, and we get their commentary. And having adult characters speaking was essential for this episode, but it's just yet another thing that kind of took away from the magic of Charlie Brown. So there is actually a goof in this, and I didn't know it was a goof. So this is an interesting point. I have to take everything I learned in this with a pinch of salt because, as I said, I knew nothing about the birth of the Constitution apart from, the very bare bones. So I'm watching these, getting a bit of American history. Being British, we didn't really cover American history that much, but it's something I've always had an interest in, but it's so complex that there's a lot of it. Not as much as British history, I'll grant you, but there's still a lot to be covered. And I'm enjoying watching this series to get that education. However, when I was on IMDb afterwards, the bit about Benjamin Franklin and the kite, which was interesting, really good depiction of Benjamin Franklin, rather like that, but apparently that happened 35 years before the convention discussing the Constitution. Now, I didn't really think too much about it. It's not as if my brain went, oh, the kite episode happened at the same time as the Constitution. I didn't actually connect those dots. But had I done, that would have been horrendously inaccurate. So if there is anything else in this that you know is incorrect, or, slightly inaccurate, feel free to let me know. I'm very willing to learn and to, correct anything that the episode has told me that's perhaps incorrect. But I guess the point there is that you do need to take this with a pinch of salt. It's interesting, it's educational, it's well animated, but it's just not as good as the previous episode. So we'll see what the rest of the season is like going forward. Still looking forward to it, but hoping it feels a little bit more like Charlie Brown magic going forward.